My grandfather's cabin sat on that mountain for 37 years. No one ever looked at it twice. The HOA never sent a single letter, never collected a single fee. To them, that cabin didn't exist, until I found gold in the creek. 72 hours later, I received my first piece of mail from the HOA in my entire life. It wasn't a welcome letter. It was a demand that I sign over all mineral rights, along with a copy of a document from 1987 that I had never seen before. They said if I didn't sign within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property and sue to seize it. If you were me, what would you do? I didn't sign. I dug, not for gold, for records. And what I found was worth more than any gold deposit. It was enough to bring down an entire system. My grandfather, Earl Murph, passed away in the spring of 2019. He left me 3 things: a worn leather wallet with $7 inside, a collection of geological survey maps from the 1950s, and a cabin on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The cabin was old, built in 1987, the year my grandfather retired from the power company and decided he wanted to spend his remaining years somewhere quiet, somewhere he could fish and hunt for rocks and not answer to anyone. I was 8 years old when he first took me up there. I remember the smell of pine needles and wood smoke. I remember the sound of the creek behind the property, running clear and cold over smooth stones. I remember thinking it was the most peaceful place I had ever been. For 5 years after he died, I didn't do much with the property. I paid the county taxes about $800 a year and drove up once or twice each summer to make sure the roof hadn't caved in and the pipes hadn't frozen. The cabin wasn't worth much on the market. The access road was unpaved. The nearest town was 40 minutes away, and the structure itself needed more work than I could afford, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. It was the last piece of my grandfather I had left, so I held on to it, the way you hold on to things that matter more for what they mean than what they're worth. I never received any mail about the property except the annual tax bill from Nevada County, no letters from neighbors, no notices from any homeowners association. As far as I knew, the cabin existed outside of any organized community. It was just land, and trees, and that creek. In the summer of 2024, I took 2 weeks off from my job as an electrician in Reno and drove up to the cabin with a truckload of supplies. I planned to fix the porch railing, replace some rotted boards on the deck, and clear the brush that had grown up around the foundation. On the 3rd day, I was working near the creek, pulling out dead branches and debris that had accumulated over the winter. The water was low. It had been a dry spring, and I could see the creek bed clearly for the first time in years. That's when I noticed something glinting in the sand. I reached down and picked up a small handful of wet sediment. Mixed in with the gravel were tiny flakes of yellow metal. At first, I thought it was pyrite fool's gold, but the flakes were soft, malleable. They didn't shatter when I pressed them between my fingers. I had watched enough videos and read enough of my grandfather's old books to know what I was looking at. It was gold, placer gold, the kind that washes down from higher elevations and settles in creek beds. The same kind that drew hundreds of thousands of people to California in 1849. You might be wondering why I did what I did next. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was excited. I wanted to know if what I had found was real, if there was more, if my grandfather had known about it all along. So I took a photo of the gold flakes in my palm and posted it to an online forum for amateur prospectors in the Sierra region. I asked if anyone could confirm what I was seeing and whether it was legal to pan for gold on private property. The responses came quickly. Yes, it was real gold. Yes, I could legally extract minerals from my own land, assuming I held the mineral rights. And yes, there were regulations I would need to follow if I wanted to do anything beyond recreational panning. I went to bed that night feeling like I had discovered something magical, a connection to history, to my grandfather, to the land itself. 72 hours later, the magic ended. I drove down to my mailbox at the end of the access road and found a certified letter waiting for me. The return address was a law office in Grass Valley, Harmon and Associates. Inside was a single page, typed on heavy cream-colored paper, with a letterhead that read, Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I had never heard that name before. I didn't know my grandfather's property was part of any HOA, but according to the letter, it was and had been since 1987. The letter informed me that all mineral rights within the Pine Ridge Estates community were the collective property of the HOA per Article 14. Section 7 of the CC&Rs. It stated that any extraction of minerals without HOA authorization constituted a violation of the covenant and could result in legal action, and it demanded that I sign an enclosed mineral rights transfer agreement within 30 days, relinquishing all claims to any minerals found on my property. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone named Victor Harmon, identified as both president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA and managing partner of Harmon and Associates. The same person who ran the HOA also ran the law firm, sending me threats. I read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what I was seeing. My grandfather had owned this land for 37 years. He had never mentioned an HOA. I had never received a single bill, a single notice, a single communication of any kind. And now, within 3 days of posting about gold online, they had found me. They knew my name. They knew my address. They knew exactly what I had discovered, and they wanted it. I sat in my truck for a long time, holding that letter, staring at the trees. Something was very wrong here. I just didn't know yet how wrong it would turn out to be. The next morning, I called the phone number listed on the letter. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice flat and professional. "Harmon and Associates, how may I direct your call?" I told her I was calling about a letter I had received from Pine Ridge Estates HOA. She asked for my name and property address, then put me on hold without another word. The hold music was classical, something bland and forgettable. I sat there for nearly 8 minutes before a man's voice came on the line, deep, unhurried, with the practiced calm of someone who had made a career out of sounding reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "Mr. Murphy," he said, "this is Victor Harmon. I understand you have questions about our recent correspondence." I had a lot of questions. I started with the most basic one. Why had I never heard of Pine Ridge Estates HOA before for 37 years? My family had owned this property, not a single bill, not a single notice. Victor listened without interrupting. When I finished, he spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child who had wandered into a conversation he didn't belong in. "Mr. Murphy, your property has been part of Pine Ridge Estates since 1987. The CC&Rs were recorded at that time. The fact that you were not previously contacted is regrettable. Administrative oversights occur, but that does not change your legal obligations." He paused, letting the word obligations hang in the air like a verdict already delivered. I asked if he could provide the original document showing my grandfather's signature. Another pause shorter this time, but I noticed it. "Submit a formal written request. We will respond within the time frame required by law." I asked what that time frame was. 30 days, he said, and the line went dead. I sent the written request that afternoon, certified mail with a return receipt. Then I started doing my own research. The Nevada County Recorder's Office website archives every deed, every lien, every recorded document related to property in the county. I searched for Pine Ridge Estates. I searched for CC&Rs. I searched for any document with my grandfather's name on it. The results came back incomplete, fragmented. I found CC&Rs for Pine Ridge Estates dated 1992, with an amendment from 2003. But nothing from 1987. I refreshed the page, searched again with different parameters. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe there was a filing system I didn't understand, an archive I couldn't access online. But every search returned the same result. The earliest HOA documents were from 92. I pulled up the Articles of Incorporation next. Pine Ridge Estates, Homeowners Association, incorporated March 15th, 1992. I stared at that date for a long time. The document Victor had sent me, the one demanding I surrender my mineral rights, was dated 1987. 5 years before the HOA legally existed. That couldn't be right. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the HOA operated informally before incorporation. Maybe there was a predecessor organization. Maybe I was reading the records wrong. I'm an electrician, not a lawyer. I fix wiring in office buildings. I know how to follow circuits, not paper trails, but I also know when something doesn't connect, and this didn't connect. I found my grandfather's original deed from 1987. Earl Murphy, sole owner, fee, simple absolute. No mention of any HOA, no mention of any covenant, no mention of mineral rights being transferred to anyone. The land was his, completely and without restriction, recorded 5 years before Pine Ridge Estates was even a legal entity. I printed everything: the deed, the incorporation documents, the CC&Rs from '92 and 2003. I spread them across my kitchen table and looked at them side by side. The document Victor sent me didn't match anything in the official record. It referenced an organization that didn't exist at the time it was supposedly created. Either I was missing something fundamental about how property law worked, or someone was lying. 2 weeks passed. No response to my written request. I called the office again. The same woman answered. I later learned her name was Kathleen Young, and told me my request was being processed. I asked when I could expect a response. She said she didn't have that information. I asked to speak with Victor Harmon. She said he was unavailable. I asked when he would be available. She said she couldn't say. I left my number for the 3rd time and hung up. The silence on the other end wasn't accidental. Victor Harmon knew exactly what I was looking for, and he was making me wait, hoping I would lose patience, lose interest, or simply give up and sign the paper they had sent me. That's how systems like this work. They don't need to be right. They just need to be exhausting. That night, I posted on an online forum for homeowners dealing with HOA disputes. I kept the details vague, didn't name names, didn't identify the location, but I laid out the basic facts. HOA claims rights based on a document from '87. HOA was incorporated in '92. No matching records in county files. The responses came slowly at first, then faster. Are you sure you're reading the dates right? I've been in Pine Ridge for 15 years. Never heard anything about mineral rights. Be careful. If the HOA president is also a lawyer, he knows how to play this game. Could be a clerical error. Don't get paranoid. Victor Harmon? I know that name. He did something similar to my family back in 2015. The comments were mixed. Skeptical, supportive, confused. But one thing stood out. I wasn't the only person asking questions about Pine Ridge Estates. And Victor Harmon's name kept appearing in stories that sounded uncomfortably familiar. I drove to the Nevada County Recorder's office on a Tuesday morning. The building was a low-slung government structure on the edge of Grass Valley, the kind of place where fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and the carpet hasn't been replaced since the Reagan administration. I signed in at the front desk and explained what I was looking for: all recorded documents related to Pine Ridge Estates HOA, specifically anything from 1987. The clerk, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, typed something into her computer and frowned. Pine Ridge Estates, she said. Let me pull that up. Her name tag read Darlene Torres. She would turn out to be the first person in this entire process who actually helped me. Darlene led me to a back room filled with filing cabinets and microfiche machines. Most of our records are digitized now, she said, but anything before '95 might still be in the physical archives. She pulled up the HOA's file on her screen and scrolled through the entries. Articles of Incorporation, 1992, CC&Rs, recorded June of '92, amendment to CC&Rs, recorded March 2003, nothing else. She searched again using different keywords: covenant, mineral rights, Pine Ridge, '87. The system returned no results. If there was a document recorded in '87, she said slowly, looking at me over her glasses, it would be in this system. Everything gets indexed when it's filed. I'm not seeing anything. I asked if a document could exist without being recorded. She shrugged. Possible, sure, but if it's not recorded, it's not enforceable against subsequent owners. That's basic property law. I asked her to print copies of everything she had found. She charged me $47 for the stack of papers, certified copies of the Articles of Incorporation, both versions of the CC&Rs, and my grandfather's original deed. As she handed me the receipt, she said something that stuck with me. Mr. Harmon comes in here pretty often. He knows this system better than most lawyers. I asked her what kind of things he usually requested. She hesitated, then shook her head. I probably shouldn't say, but let's just say he's very interested in older properties, the ones where the original owners have passed away. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. That night, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table and started comparing them line by line. The CCNRs from 1992 were straightforward rules about property maintenance, architectural standards, noise restrictions, standard HOA stuff, no mention of mineral rights anywhere. The 2003 amendment was longer, more detailed. It added several new sections, including Article 14, Community Resource Management. Section 7 of that article stated that all mineral, water, and subsurface rights within Pine Ridge Estates shall be held collectively by the association for the benefit of all members. And there it was, the clause Victor Harmon had cited in his letter, but it was dated 2003, not 1987, and buried in the fine print at the bottom. I found something else. This amendment applies to all properties acquired after the date of recording. You might be thinking what I was thinking. My grandfather acquired his property in 1987, 16 years before this amendment existed. If the amendment only applied to properties acquired after 2003, then it shouldn't apply to me at all. I read that sentence 5 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I pulled out the document Victor had sent me, the one he claimed was from '87, and compared it to the 2003 amendment. The language was almost identical. Same phrasing, same structure, same Article 14, Section 7. The only differences were the date at the top and a few minor formatting changes. Someone had taken the 2003 document and backdated it by 16 years. I wanted to be certain before I accused anyone of forgery, so I looked more carefully. The font on Victor's document was clean, modern, and evenly spaced. The font on the 1992 CCNRs, which I had just picked up from the county, was different, older, slightly uneven, the way documents looked when they were typed on electric typewriters or early word processors. The 2003 amendment looked more similar to Victor's version, but still not quite the same. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. I made a note to look into it further when I had more time. My phone buzzed, an email from Harmon and Associates. Dear Mr. Murphy, this is a reminder that your deadline to execute the mineral rights transfer agreement is in 18 days. Failure to comply will result in the association exercising its full legal remedies, including but not limited to placement of a lien and initiation of foreclosure proceedings. Please contact our office immediately to arrange signing. No response to my document request, no acknowledgement of my questions, just another threat, dressed up in legal language, designed to make me feel small and powerless. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I opened the county assessor's website and started searching for other properties in Pine Ridge Estates. If Victor Harmon had done this to me, maybe he had done it to others. The assessor's database listed 87 parcels within the Pine Ridge area. I copied down the addresses and owner names, one by one, into a spreadsheet. It took me 3 hours. When I finished, I had a list of people who might have answers or who might be asking the same questions I was. The next morning, I started writing letters. I didn't know if anyone would respond, but I knew I couldn't fight this alone. And I knew that if Victor Harmon had built a system to steal from people like me, there had to be others who had seen it from the inside. Somewhere in that list, I hoped, was someone willing to talk. The responses started coming in after about a week. I had sent letters to 20 addresses within Pine Ridge Estates, handwritten notes explaining who I was, what had happened, and asking if anyone else had experienced something similar with the HOA. Most people didn't reply. Some probably thought I was a scammer or a troublemaker, but 7 people wrote back. And what they told me made my stomach turn. Walter Briggs was the first to call. He was 68 years old, had owned his property since 1994, and spoke with the slow, careful cadence of a man who had learned not to trust easily. They came to me in 2019, he said, told me I had to sign over my mineral rights as part of a membership renewal. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was paperwork. I asked him if he had seen any document from 1987. He said no. His paperwork referenced the 2003 amendment, but he had signed anyway, because Victor Harmon told him it was mandatory. Maria Santos called the next day. She was 52, had inherited her property from her parents in 2001, and had a story that made Walters look almost gentle. In 2020, she received a letter claiming she owed $12,000 in back fees dating to 1998, fees she had never been billed for. fees that had apparently been accumulating for over 2 decades without a single notice. She didn't have the money to fight it, so she paid. "I just wanted it to go away, Sol," she said, her voice tight with old anger. "I didn't have time to hire a lawyer. I had 2 kids in school. They knew I couldn't fight back." I asked her if she had kept any of the paperwork. She had. She promised to mail me copies. I asked her one more question before we hung up. Did she know anyone else this had happened to? She gave me 2 more names. Henry Lawson was the one who changed everything. He was 71, had owned his property since 1989, and he was the only person I found who had actually fought back. In 2017, Victor Harmon sent him the same letter I had received, demanding he sign over mineral rights based on the 1987 document. Henry refused. The HOA placed a lien on his property and filed a lawsuit. Henry hired a lawyer, a woman named Olivia Watson from Sacramento who specialized in property rights disputes. The case went on for nearly 2 years before the HOA suddenly dropped it. "They withdrew everything," Henry told me. "No explanation, no settlement, just gone." I asked him why. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because they knew they would lose. My lawyer found problems with their documents, serious problems, but I ran out of money before we could take it to trial, and they knew that too. They just had to wait me out." I shared what I had learned, anonymously, on the homeowners forum where I had first posted. The response was immediate and divided. "This is exactly why I'll never live in an HOA. You're making serious accusations. Hope you have proof. I'm in Pine Ridge, checking my own paperwork right now. Victor Harmon did something similar to my family in 2015. We didn't fight, we just moved. Sounds like a coordinated scam. Someone should call the state attorney general. Or it's a misunderstanding, and you're about to ruin a man's reputation. How many people have to come forward before it stops being a misunderstanding?" The community was splitting. Some believed, some doubted. But the conversation was no longer just about me. It was about a pattern that stretched back years, touched multiple families, and always led back to the same name. I called Olivia Watson's office the next morning. I explained who I was, how I had gotten her name, and what I was dealing with. She remembered the Lawson case immediately. "That one stuck with me," she said. "The documents they produced had inconsistencies I'd never seen before, dates that didn't match incorporation records, language that seemed copied from later amendments. We were building a strong case, but Mr. Lawson couldn't afford to continue, and the HOA knew it." I asked if she would be willing to look at my situation. She agreed to review my documents. No charge for the initial consultation. I drove to Sacramento 3 days later with a folder full of everything I had collected Victor's letter, the county records, the responses from other homeowners, and my grandfather's original deed. I am Michael Vincent, the storyteller bringing you today's story, here on Dear HOA. And if you were in this situation facing an HOA that suddenly appeared after decades of silence, waiving documents that don't add up, demanding you hand over rights to your own land, what would you do? Would you sign and walk away? Would you fight, even knowing the cost? Leave your answer in the comments below. Let's see whose solution is the best. Thank you all. Olivia spent 2 hours going through everything. She asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. She made notes in the margins. She cross-referenced dates and signatures with databases I didn't know existed. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. Gone was the professional neutrality. In its place was something sharper, the look of someone who had just found exactly what she was hunting for. "Mr. Murphy," she said, "what you have here isn't just a property dispute. This is systematic fraud, and I think I can prove it." She pointed to Victor's 1987 document. "This font," she said. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. "It's Calibri. Microsoft released it in 2007. It didn't exist in 1987. It couldn't have. This document isn't just backdated. It was created decades after it claims to be from..." I stared at the paper in her hand. A font. Something so small, so ordinary, so easy to overlook. And it was the key to everything. "They've been doing this for years," Olivia said quietly. "But they got careless. And now we have proof." 10 days. That was how much time I had left when the second letter arrived. This one came in a larger envelope, thick with documents, and the tone had shifted from threatening to aggressive. The cover letter listed a series of violations allegedly observed on my property during a routine inspection conducted 3 days earlier. Overgrown vegetation exceeding community standards. Roof shingles are in visible disrepair. Fencing materials are not consistent with approved architectural guidelines. Each violation carried a fine. Overgrown vegetation, $800. Roof damage, $1,200. Fencing noncompliance, $2,200. Total $4,200. Due within 14 days. And at the bottom, a paragraph that made the strategy crystal clear. Failure to remit payment for the above violations, in addition to execution of the mineral rights transfer agreement, will result in immediate placement of a lien and initiation of foreclosure proceedings. They were putting pressure. The mineral rights demand wasn't enough, so they invented violations to pile on top. $4,200 I didn't have, for problems that had existed on that property for years without anyone saying a word. The roof had needed work since before my grandfather died. The fence was the same fence he had built in 1992. And the vegetation we were talking about, a mountain cabin surrounded by forest. Overgrown vegetation was the natural state of things. None of this had mattered when the property was worthless. It only mattered now because I had found gold and refused to hand it over. Victor Harmon wasn't enforcing rules. He was manufacturing leverage. I sat down with Olivia Watson 2 days later in her Sacramento office. She had reviewed everything: the original letter, the violations notice, the county records, the testimonies from Walter and Maria and Henry. She laid out my options with the kind of clinical precision that comes from years of navigating systems designed to crush ordinary people. Option 1, sign the mineral rights agreement, pay the fines, and walk away. I would keep the cabin, but lose any claim to what was underneath it. Option 2, fight. File a lawsuit against Victor Harmon and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA for fraud, forgery, and intentional misrepresentation. Request a preliminary injunction to block any lien or foreclosure while the case proceeds. Force them into court, where the forged document would be exposed. You might be thinking, why not just hire a lawyer and let the system handle it? The answer is money. I had about $15,000 in savings. Olivia agreed to take the case on contingency 30% of any judgment or settlement if we won. But I would still need to cover filing fees, court costs, expert witnesses, and document production. Her estimate was $3,000 to $5,000 up front, with more potentially needed as the case progressed. If we lost, I would owe nothing to Olivia, but I would be responsible for my own costs and possibly the HOA's legal fees if the court ruled against me. I could lose the cabin. I could lose my savings. I could end up worse than if I had just signed the paper and walked away. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the 37 years he had spent on that land, fishing in that creek, watching the seasons change from that porch. He hadn't left me gold. He had left me a place with meaning, with history, with roots that went deeper than any mineral deposit. And now someone was trying to take it, not because they had any right to it, but because they thought I wouldn't fight back, because they thought I was just an electrician from Reno who didn't know any better. I looked at Olivia across the desk. File the lawsuit, I said. She nodded, as if she had expected nothing else. The complaint was filed in Nevada County Superior Court 4 days later. Murphyville Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, et al., case number 2024, CV 01847. The defendants were the HOA as an entity and Victor Harmon personally. The claims included fraud, forgery, intentional misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and civil conspiracy. Olivia also filed a motion for preliminary injunction, asking the court to block any enforcement action against my property while the case was pending. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, she sent a formal demand letter to Victor Harmon, withdraw all claims within 5 business days, or face public litigation that would expose everything. The response came faster than I expected, but not from Harmon and Associates. A different law firm, based in Sacramento, is representing Victor Harmon in his personal capacity. The letter dismissed our claims as baseless and defamatory, and threatened countersuits for malicious prosecution if we proceeded. But what caught my attention was the letterhead. Craig Newman, attorney at law. Not Victor Harmon, not Harmon and Associates. Victor had hired outside counsel to respond to a case involving his own law firm. That told me something important. He was worried. He was distancing himself from the documents he had created. He was preparing for the possibility that this might actually go to trial. For the first time since this started, I felt something shift. Not confident, not yet, but something close to it. The ground beneath Victor Harmon's feet was starting to crack, and I intended to keep pushing until it gave way completely. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Friday morning. I arrived at the Nevada County Superior Court at 9:15, wearing the only suit I owned, a charcoal gray two-piece I had bought for my grandfather's funeral 5 years earlier. The courthouse was an older building, stone facade and tall windows, the kind of place that still felt like it meant something. Olivia Watson met me in the lobby, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with documents and a laptop bag over her shoulder. She looked calm, focused, the way someone looks when they have done this 100 times before. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "remember that today is just about the injunction. We're not proving the whole case. We're just proving enough to make the judge stop them from taking your property while we do." I nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. Courtroom 4 was smaller than I had imagined. 2 tables facing the judge's bench, a witness stand to the side, wooden gallery seating behind a low divider. When we walked in, I was surprised to see people already there, maybe 30 of them, filling most of the seats. I recognized some faces from my research: Walter Briggs in the second row, Maria Santos near the back, and Henry Lawson by the aisle with a cane resting against his knee. Word had spread. The community was watching. A woman with a press badge sat in the corner, laptop open, typing something before the proceedings even began. I later learned she was from the Union, the local newspaper. Someone had tipped her off. I never found out who. Victor Harmon sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, Craig Newman. I had never seen Victor in person before, only heard his voice on the phone. He was older than I expected, mid-50s with silver hair combed back from a high forehead, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck payment. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He stared straight ahead, hands folded on the table, projecting the kind of practiced calm that successful men use when they want you to know they're not worried. But there was something around his eyes, a tightness, a strain. He was worried. He just didn't want anyone to see it. Judge Matthew Hill entered at exactly 10 o'clock. He was a heavy-set man in his early 60s, with reading glasses perched on his nose and an expression that suggested he had seen every kind of case and wasn't easily impressed by any of them. He reviewed the preliminary filings, asked a few procedural questions, and then invited Olivia to present her argument for the injunction. She stood, walked to the center of the room, and began speaking in a voice that carried without being loud. She explained the timeline: my grandfather's purchase in 1987, the HOA's incorporation in 1992, the sudden demand for mineral rights in 2024, based on a document that claimed to predate the organization's existence. She walked the judge through the county records, the deed, the articles of incorporation, the CC&Rs from 92 and 2003. She showed him the letter Victor had sent me, with its claim of authority under a covenant from 87, and then she paused. "Your Honor," she said, "the document the defendants have relied upon to assert their claims contains a critical inconsistency." She opened her laptop and connected it to the courtroom's display screen. The 1987 document appeared, enlarged and clear. This document is printed in Colibri font. Calibri was developed by Microsoft and released publicly in 2007 as part of Windows Vista. It did not exist in 1987. It could not have existed. She let that sink in for a moment. This document is not authentic. It was created at least 20 years after the date it claims to bear. It is, in the most literal sense, a forgery. The courtroom went silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for what comes next, but the heavy silence of collective realization. I looked at Victor Harmon. His face had gone pale. His hands, still folded on the table, were no longer still. The fingers were pressing into each other hard enough to turn the knuckles white. Craig Newman leaned over and whispered something to him. Victor didn't respond. Judge Hill removed his glasses and looked directly at the defendant's table. "Mr. Harmon," he said, "I'd like you to respond to this directly. Can you explain the discrepancy Ms. Watson has identified?" Victor stood slowly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat. "Your Honor, The document in question was based on historical records and prior agreements among property owners in the Pine Ridge area. It represents the intent of the original landowners before formal incorporation. The judge cut him off. "I'm not asking about intent. Mr. Harmon, I'm asking about this specific document. The font did not exist in 1987. How do you explain that?" Victor's mouth opened, then closed. "We are currently reviewing our archived records to locate the source materials," he said. "There may have been a transcription from older documents into a newer format." The judge raised his hand. "A transcription that was then presented as an original binding covenant from 1987. Victor had no answer. The silence stretched. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Walter Briggs shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight. Maria Santos wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Someone near the back muttered, "I knew it." The reporter from the Union was typing furiously. Henry Lawson caught my eye from across the room and gave me a single, slow nod. Outside, through the tall windows, the sun was bright and ordinary, indifferent to what was unfolding inside. But in that courtroom, something had shifted. The air felt different, charged with the weight of exposure, of truth dragged into the light after years in the dark. Victor Harmon was still standing, but he looked diminished somehow, as if the suit no longer fit the same way it had 20 minutes earlier. Judge Hill spoke again. "The court finds sufficient evidence of potential fraud to warrant protective measures. The motion for preliminary injunction is granted. Pine Ridge Estates HOA and Mr. Harmon personally are hereby prohibited from placing any lien, initiating any foreclosure proceeding, or taking any enforcement action against Mr. Murphy's property, pending resolution of this case. A full evidentiary hearing will be scheduled within 45 days. He struck the gavel once. "We're adjourned." I stood there, not quite believing it. Olivia put a hand on my shoulder. "That's round one," she said. "The fight isn't over." I knew she was right. But as I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, passing Victor Harmon without a word, I allowed myself one small moment of something that felt almost like hope. The system had listened, and for the first time, I wasn't alone. The story broke in the Union 3 days after the hearing. The headline read, "HOA President Accused of Forging Documents, Defrauding Homeowners in Years-Long Scheme." The article detailed everything: the fabricated 1987 document, the Calibri font analysis, the pattern of demands targeting vulnerable property owners, and the preliminary injunction granted by Judge Hill. It quoted Olivia Watson, who described the case as one of the most brazen examples of HOA fraud I've encountered in 20 years of practice. It quoted Maria Santos, who said she had paid $12,000 based on claims she now believed were entirely fabricated. And it quoted Victor Harmon, through his attorney Craig Newman, who called the allegations unfounded and defamatory and promised a vigorous defense. But the damage was already done. The story was shared hundreds of times within the first day. Local television stations picked it up by the end of the week, and suddenly, Pine Ridge Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. The dominoes started falling almost immediately. Within 7 days of the article's publication, 3 additional residents of Pine Ridge filed their own lawsuits against the HOA and Victor Harmon personally. Walter Briggs claimed he had been coerced into signing over mineral rights under pretenses. Maria Santos sought recovery of the $12,000 she had paid, plus damages for emotional distress. A third homeowner, someone I had never contacted, someone who had read about the case in the newspaper and recognized her own experience, came forward with records showing she had been threatened with foreclosure over fees that had never been properly assessed. The cases were consolidated for efficiency. Olivia Watson took on Walter and Maria as additional clients. The third homeowner hired her own attorney, a younger lawyer from Grass Valley who had been waiting for a case exactly like this. The State Bar of California opened a formal investigation into Victor Harmon's conduct. Under California law, attorneys who engage in fraud, forgery, or misrepresentation in their professional capacity can face discipline ranging from public reprimand to permanent disbarment. The investigation would take months to complete, but the mere fact of its existence was enough to destroy whatever remained of Victor's professional reputation. You might be wondering why he wasn't arrested, why he didn't face criminal charges immediately. The answer is complicated. Forgery is a crime, But proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt is harder than proving civil fraud by a preponderance of evidence. The district attorney's office reviewed the case and ultimately declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence that Victor had personally created the forged documents rather than relying on documents created by others. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was the reality of how the system works. Some people slip through the criminal net even when their civil liability is overwhelming. Victor resigned as president of Pine Ridge Estates HOA 2 weeks after the newspaper story broke. The announcement cited health reasons and thanked the community for years of support and partnership. No one believed it. The HOA immediately retained new legal counsel, a firm from Sacramento with no connection to Victor or his practice, and began the process of damage control. They reached out to Olivia Watson with a settlement offer before the 45-day evidentiary hearing even arrived. The terms were better than I had expected. The HOA acknowledged that I held full and exclusive mineral rights to my property, free of any claim or encumbrance. They agreed to refund all fees and fines paid by affected homeowners over the past decade, a total that would eventually reach nearly $180,000 across multiple families. Victor Harmon personally agreed to pay me $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal costs. And the HOA committed to an independent financial audit covering the entire period of Victor's presidency, 8 years of records that no one outside the board had ever examined. In exchange, I agreed to drop my lawsuit and release the HOA from future claims related to this matter. But I insisted on one condition: all court documents would remain public record. No sealing, no confidentiality agreement, no quiet burial of what had happened. Olivia negotiated for 2 days before they accepted. The audit results came back 4 months later. They were devastating. During Victor Harmon's 8 years as president, the HOA had collected approximately $320,000 in fees, fines, and settlements that had no legitimate basis under the CC&Rs. Money extracted from people who didn't know their rights, who couldn't afford lawyers, who signed papers because they were afraid of losing their homes. Some of that money had gone into the HOA's general fund. Some of it had gone to Harmon and Associates for legal services that were never properly disclosed or approved. The exact accounting would take years to untangle, but the scope was clear. This wasn't a mistake. It was a business model. The state bar issued its ruling 6 months after that. Victor Harmon's license to practice law was suspended for 3 years, with the possibility of permanent revocation if any further violations occurred. He was also placed on the California Real Estate Commission's watch list, effectively ending any future career in property law. He sold his house in Pine Ridge Estates quietly, without announcement, and moved somewhere no one bothered to track. I never saw him again. Kathleen Young, the secretary who had answered my calls all those months ago, resigned the same week Victor did. Through her own attorney, she provided a statement acknowledging that she had been aware of irregularities in HOA documentation but had been afraid to speak up for fear of losing her job. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. The new board accepted her resignation without comment. I stood in the county recorder's office on a cold morning in December, watching Darlene Torres update the records. My grandfather's property, now officially recorded with full mineral rights intact. No liens, no encumbrances, no Victor Harmon anywhere in the chain of title. Darlene stamped the final page and handed me the certified copy. "That's done," she said. I looked at the paper in my hands, my name, my land, my rights, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, something quieter than that. Completion. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, I drove up to the cabin on a Saturday morning in early spring. The road was still unpaved, still bumpy, still 40 minutes from the nearest town. Nothing about that had changed, but the cabin itself looked different now. I had spent the winter making repairs: new shingles on the roof, fresh boards on the porch, a coat of weatherproof stain on the siding that made the old wood gleam in the sunlight. The fence my grandfather had built in '92 was still standing, but I had reinforced the posts and replaced the sections that had rotted through. It wasn't a showpiece. It would never be featured in a magazine, but it was solid, and it was mine, and no one was ever going to take it from me again. I hired a geological survey company to assess the creek, a proper evaluation by people who knew what they were looking at. The report came back after 3 weeks. Yes, There was gold, placer deposits, the kind that washed down from higher elevations over thousands of years, but the quantities were modest. Commercial extraction would cost more than the gold was worth. Their estimate of total recoverable value, somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000, spread across the entire property, not enough to justify a mining operation, not enough to change anyone's life. I read the report sitting on the porch, listening to the creek run behind the cabin, and I started laughing. $20,000. That was what Victor Harmon had tried to steal. That was what he had built an entire fraud machine around a few flakes of gold in a mountain stream, worth less than the legal fees he had already spent trying to take it. But here's the thing I realized. Sitting there with that report in my hands, it was never about the gold, not for Victor, and not for me, for Victor. It was about power, the thrill of taking something from someone who couldn't fight back, the satisfaction of watching people sign away their rights because they were too tired or too scared or too broke to resist. The gold was just an excuse, a trigger that activated a system he had been running for years. And for me, the gold was never the point either. I didn't fight because I wanted to be rich. I fought because my grandfather left me something, and someone tried to steal it, and I couldn't let that stand. Some things matter more than money. Some things are worth protecting, even when the math doesn't add up. I used a portion of the settlement money to do something I had been thinking about since the day I first met Walter Briggs. I established a small nonprofit called the Sierra Homeowners Rights Fund. The mission was simple: provide legal resources and support to property owners facing abusive HOA practices in the Sierra Nevada region. Not a law firm, we couldn't practice law directly, but a clearinghouse for information. A network of volunteer attorneys willing to take cases pro bono or on contingency, and a small emergency fund for people who needed help with filing fees or court costs. Walter Briggs agreed to serve on the board, so did Maria Santos. Henry Lawson said he was too old for meetings but would help however he could. Olivia Watson signed on as our volunteer legal advisor, agreeing to review cases and provide guidance at no charge. The fund wasn't going to change the world. I knew that. HOA abuse was a nationwide problem, and a small nonprofit in Northern California wasn't going to fix a broken system. But it was something. It was a way to take what had happened to me, the fear, the anger, the months of uncertainty, and turn it into something useful. Every person we helped was one fewer family going through what I had gone through. Every case we supported was one more crack in the wall that people like Victor Harmon had built. That felt like enough. That felt like what my grandfather would have wanted. I found the photograph in a box I had brought up from storage, one of those old prints with the white borders and the slightly faded colors. My grandfather, standing in front of the cabin in 1988, the year after he built it. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, squinting into the sun, smiling the kind of smile you only see on someone who has exactly what they want. I didn't remember the photo being taken. I must have been 9 years old, but I remembered him. I remembered the way he talked about the land, the way he treated it not as something he owned, but as something he was responsible for. He used to say that land wasn't given by anyone. It belonged to the people who protected it. I walked down to the creek and stood at the edge, watching the water move over the stones. The same water that had been running here for thousands of years, carrying tiny flakes of gold down from the mountains, depositing them in the sand for anyone patient enough to look. My grandfather had known about the gold. I was certain of that now. He had spent 37 years walking this creek, studying rocks, and reading geological surveys. He must have seen the flakes, just like I had, but he never told anyone. He never tried to cash in. He just lived here, quietly, letting the creek keep its secrets. Maybe he knew that some things were worth more left alone. Maybe he knew that the moment you told the world about gold, the world would come to take it. I pulled the photograph from my pocket and looked at it one more time. Then I folded it carefully and put it back. The creek kept running. The sun kept shining through the pine trees. Somewhere down the mountain, the world was still full of people like Victor Harmon, people who saw value only in what they could take, who built systems to extract and exploit and discard. But up here, in this place my grandfather had chosen, there was something different. There was land that had been protected. There was a fight that had been won. There was a legacy that would continue, not because I was special, but because I had refused to let go. If you're watching this and you've ever faced something similar, an HOA that overstepped, a system that tried to crush you, A moment when you had to choose between signing away your rights and standing your ground. I want you to know something. You're not alone. People have fought before you. People will fight after you. And sometimes, if you're stubborn enough and careful enough and lucky enough, the system that was built to break you becomes the system that breaks itself. My grandfather didn't leave me gold. He left me something better. He left me a place worth defending. And I defended it.